Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Rios fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. This is way back. Welcome on. Let's Taylor.
What is up, Dodger fans? This is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Matt Moreno, DodgerHeads Live. Matt, the day we have been waiting for. The lockout is over. Mandatory spring training reporting day is just a few days away. Opening day is less than a month away. It's been a bizarre few weeks, few months since the lockout began. What a roller coaster of emotions, optimism, pessimism. It's been bizarre, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, we went into the offseason sort of expecting there would be a lockout, and then it came, and it's just all, roller coaster of emotions, like you just said. And, I think it's important. I know viewers are still kind of trickling in, so hopefully enough of them will get to see and hear this. But I think it's important for us to start tonight's show with really thanking, all the fans who have stuck with us the past 3 months.
Yep.
It was frustrating at times for everybody. We had to kind of deliver bad news a lot of the times, minor league signings that didn't necessarily excite people. But we appreciate everybody who still engaged with us on Twitter, obviously on Facebook, here, YouTube, whether we posted recorded videos after the fact or the few kind of live ones we've done. Now, tonight is kind of the start of what we enjoyed last season, which was really, real baseball. We could talk about games and everything else that comes with it.
Yeah, and hey, you know what? If Robbie Erlin ever comes up and contributes this year, Matt, you and I and everybody that watched those videos is going to be dialed in. So we appreciate the folks joining us, filtering in on YouTube, on Facebook. We got a good crowd coming in. Rich, William, Laura, Nomo, FOMO, Blanca, Face. We got somebody named Face, so shout out. Thank you guys for joining us. I see questions about free agency, Freddie Freeman. I'll start with this. If something crazy happens and we haven't gotten to it yet, please drop it in the chat. I'm going to be looking down. You'll see me monitoring the chat. I've got Twitter open. John Morosi hinting that the Dodgers do have real interest in Freddie Freeman, that he might be the first guy to sign. So we're crossing our fingers that we get some good news, maybe some Clayton Kershaw news, who knows, on this show. But Matt, let's start with just the emotions you felt. I mean, you and I have been on here optimistic and pessimistic and then optimistic again. They met for a week in Florida. We all felt like, hey, you know what? This is good. They're meeting every day. And then we get to the finish line. We find out that the owners had kind of been blowing smoke about how real those talks were. And then it falls apart. And then everybody leaves. And then they get back together and there's another deadline. And oh, by the way, international draft. We're just going to chuck this one in there. And I'll be honest, even today, right at the made-up false deadline that once again was set, all of a sudden they're like, by the way, we want you to drop $500 million in lawsuits. And so there were days when I felt was high likelihood, days I felt there was low likelihood. I tweeted this morning, I thought today would be the day. It ended up being it. So for you, when 12:30 rolled around and that news finally hit, how were you feeling? Was it relief? Was it excitement? A mix of the two?
Definitely a mix of the two. And then a kind of, self-reminder like, okay, this could get really crazy just from covering the team website, because everybody was saying as soon as the owners vote to approve the CBA, then free agency is going to start. There ended up being like about a half hour lag time from when it was reported that owners had unanimously approved it to when the lockout kind of, quote unquote, officially ended and transactions could sort of begin. But yeah, I will say going into today, my expectations were low. And that was just because we had just gone through another round of, oh, hey, they're close. Oh, actually, they're not. Yeah. And so I didn't, the international draft in particular is a complex issue. And I understand kind of both sides of it. And I could understand that the players weren't necessarily going to want to rush that decision.
Yeah.
Now, when it came out Thursday morning that, hey, they actually agreed to kick that can down the road to July 25th, I believe it is, without, sort of having to reopen the CBA depending on what decision is made. Then I thought, okay, maybe they'll really get something done. And sure enough, things kind of started to pick up. The lawsuits, it's unfortunate that MLB at kind of every turn tried to sneak stuff in and throw stuff in and, move the goalpost, if you will. But I did feel that the offer had kind of gotten good enough in other areas that had the players walked away from this one, they would have then taken on, I think, a brunt the brunt of the criticism because the majority of fans, I don't think we're going to necessarily care about the pending lawsuits.
Yeah, and it's fascinating how the vote comes down because they have 8 players that are sort of negotiating these deals, the executive committee. All 8 of them voted to reject this deal. But they decided to send it to a vote to the 30 player reps. 26 of the 30. They needed 24. They got 26 yes votes. The deal was passed, and so there we go. Here's some exciting news for you, Matt. Minor league breaking news for the Dodgers. Daniel Zamora, left-handed pitcher, announcing a deal with the Dodgers. Not breaking, 16 minutes ago, but he pitched for the Mariners 4 1/3 innings last year. A nice little 6.23 ERA. So if you're looking for some AAA left-handed pitching depth, Daniel Zamora, there you go. 40th round pick in 2015 of the Pittsburgh Pirates. We're breaking news there. But yeah, again, interesting to see how it played out, that the executive committee was all against it. And basically, if you want to sort of get in the head of who is most like the fans, it's probably the 30 guys that are not in the room, that are just reading, they're getting more information than us. But it makes sense to me that the 8 people in the room were pissed. They wanted blood. They wanted a pound of flesh. They wanted to go get more. And it makes sense to me that the other 30 were like, screw this. Like, you guys might be pissed about this Steve Cohen tax line or whatever because Max Scherzer's in the room, but we don't care. Like, we're not going to lose games and paychecks over that. I do agree with you. I think this deal got good enough that it was hard to justify not doing it. So let's get to the details of this. I'm going to read some of the highlights, Matt, and you can kind of tell me what jumps out to you. So a number of things here. Number one, brand new, a pre-arbitration bonus pool of $50 million. This is a pool of $50 million that is basically available to all players based on wins above replacement. That will be divvied up amongst them. I think there's some, like, if you finish in the top of certain awards, there's a straight bonus, like $2.5 million if you win the MVP or something like that. So there's some there, but there's a $50 million pool that does not go up. The players wanted a bigger number that would go up $5 million a year. It sticks at $50 million for all 5 years. Minimum salary gets a 23% increase over last year. This is the most significant change, I would argue. 23% raise in the minimum salary to $700,000. That goes up $20,000 every year over the course, ending at $780,000. The third biggest piece was the competitive balance threshold. 10% increase over last year's, about $210 million, I believe, 214 maybe. It goes up to 230 and then it increases over the course of the deal to $244 million. Some other ones, universal DH, 12-team postseason. One other I think that's interesting that honestly will have an impact on the Dodgers is that players can now only be optioned 5 times. It used to be unlimited, now only 5. So once you've optioned a guy for a 5th time, I imagine he just stays on the 40-man and can't be called back up to the major league. So when you think about those, are there certain ones that kind of jump out to you? Maybe both as specifically a Dodger fan or just as a fan of the game in general?
Yeah, so I guess from a Dodgers perspective, obviously the luxury tax thresholds and the now cap on how many times you can option a player to the minors per season are most noteworthy. Yeah. We've talked about on whether it's when we went live last time negotiations broke down or short videos we've done on updating the lockout talks, CBA talks, excuse me. The luxury tax threshold, like, teams don't have to, just because it gets to whatever it is, like, it doesn't mean you need to spend.
Yeah.
And again, like, I am skeptical of, these teams are trying to say, oh, you're going to have the Dodgers or the Mets or whoever running away and spending a ton. Well, okay, but if you want to put these restraints in place, then if you want to keep the luxury tax lower, is the rest of the pack going to come up closer to it? Because so far, like, the majority of the teams really have.
I'll answer that for you, Matt. The answer is no. The rest of the pack is not going. The $40 million a year Pirates are not planning on getting up above 150.
So, kind of looking at that, as much as 230, fine. I think it's a good enough starting point. It could have been higher, but, was it going to be that much? It already is a pretty significant increase from the last CBA, so fine. But if you look at that and what it settled at, and if you look at now the cap on how many times a player can be optioned to the minors, those are two sort of mechanisms that are going to inhibit the Dodgers, A, spending ability, obviously, and B, one of their strengths, which is organizational depth. Yeah. They, for better or worse, if you want to say at times, maybe they've gamed the system a little bit. They would hardly be the first team to do it.
Yeah, safe to say.
The option a guy, call up. We saw it last year. Mitch White was recalled. He'd make a start. Okay, Mitch White is optioned the next day. Yeah. Like, you're not going to see that anymore. And that will require a little bit of a different approach by the Dodgers now.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going to get to one of the biggest other notable things is that there are no rule changes for 2022. Likely some rule changes in 2023. Major League Baseball can implement those with a 45-day notice, but none this year. The one thing about the options is it honestly weirdly might speed up the game because now you're not going to have 8 fresh arms in the bullpen every single time. If you've got Mitch White, he's got to be available, and he's got to be one of the guys, so maybe there's less of those. But from a quality of life, like I see people saying, hey, HG in our YouTube chat says, I don't like the option limitations. I understand that as a fan, but imagine what it's like to be one of these guys that's getting shuttled between Oklahoma City and Los Angeles, basically 4 or 5 times a month. I mean, there are guys that were getting optioned like 15 to 20 times a year, it felt like. So I think from their perspective, it's great. Also, the minimum salary comes up. You can only be optioned 5 times. So Mitch White now, like if you want him to make 2 starts, now he's getting paid for 7 days of Major League service time rather than getting optioned and basically, and I know there were some mechanisms like if you get called up, you get paid a certain amount of days, but it's a quality of life thing. I think it makes sense. And it ties into another change that I haven't mentioned. Well, I shouldn't say a change. One note for 2022 is that the Rule 5 draft was canceled. Now, why do I bring that up in relation to the 5 options? Well, the Dodgers, prior to thinking a Rule 5 draft was going to happen, they added 5 guys to their 40-man roster, many of whom who have never seen above like high A or double A. Of the 5, I think James Outman is probably the only one that I would say there is a better than 50% chance we see him at the majors. But now there's no Rule 5 draft, so the Dodgers could have theoretically just kept all these guys stashed, saved 5 open 40-man roster spots. So now you only get 5 options per player. The Dodgers have 5 of their 40-man roster spots. So if you do the math, if you got 14 guys who aren't on the Major League roster, 5 of those spots are taken by guys who aren't going to contribute. Justin Lorber, I was tweeting back and forth with him. He said at least 2 of those guys, it hurts because they're just guys that don't really have a significant chance of making the Major League roster. So that's another one. Again, that's just for 1 year, the Rule 5 draft piece, but just some bad luck for the Dodgers. Now, you could make the argument on the other side. The Dodgers have a deep farm system. None of the other guys that potentially could have gotten swiped by other teams will get swiped. Just bad luck. There's no like malice or anything there. It's just unfortunate. A couple other just quick ones. The draft lottery, that's a new one. 6 picks there. Any team that does not make the playoff has some percentage chance of getting a top 6 pick. The amateur draft is set at 20 rounds now. There's a full year of service time if you finish in the top 2 of the Rookie of the Year. There's draft picks for teams who promote players on opening day. So basically, if you have a top prospect on the roster on opening day, he goes on to finish in the top whatever number of end-of-year awards, you get a free draft pick. And then, as you mentioned, the international draft qualifying offer combo, they need to make some decisions there. So you kind of hinted at this, but as somebody who steps back, knows where we started, knows where we are today, if you were a player or a fan who's rooting for the players, are you happy with this deal at the end of the day?
I think so. And again, like I said earlier on, there were some contingencies that MLB tied to certain things, and in a perfect world that wouldn't have been the case. But fact of the matter, I mean, I don't think there's any deny. I guess if you're on the ownership side, you might deny it just for the sake of doing it. But generally speaking, there's no denying that the last CBA was the players, got hosed in it, right? And so they were fighting an uphill battle this time around. And obviously you want to make up ground. They deserve to make up ground. Stuff needed to be changed a little bit to balance the scales out more so. And frankly, like there was enough pie for everybody to go around. It's just like, let's just make this a little bit more balanced. I think it got there. It was more drawn out than I think it should have been. I thought, some of the proposals that were happening in the past 2-3 weeks should have been happening in January and not February when spring training games are supposed to be playing. But at the end of the day, it's definitely, at least 1.5 steps forward from my perspective for the players. And that's significant. And now the next time the new CBA comes up, maybe the owners will be upset with how far some of the stuff went. There will have to be more give and take, but at least the players will be coming from a stronger position than what they were.
Yeah. And I'll clean one other thing up. I believe HG in the chat commented that they also changed the extra inning rule, runners starting on second. That was done away with, as well as the 7-inning doubleheaders will be done away with. So I know the ghost runner at second base is a controversial one. I actually thought the 7-inning doubleheaders was kind of a cool touch, but
I agree with you on that.
So those are other ones. But I agree with you. I think all in all for the players, this was a successful negotiation. And I think part of it has nothing to do with the numbers. It has everything to do with the fact that they stayed strong, that they didn't break, they didn't cave, they didn't let the owners screw with them. I think they won the approval of the fans. The fans were on their side for the first time in a real way because of social media. And so I think it was an encouraging moment. Now, the numbers they got, are they fair? No. But are they closer to fair? Yes. One of the things I was saying is one of the most important numbers for the players to look at is where all of these are where these numbers are in year 5. So next time they go to negotiate, they're going to be negotiating from a minimum salary of $780,000 instead of like $570. They're going to be negotiating from a competitive balance threshold of $244 million instead of $214 million. So when they go to the next year, it's going to be, hey, we just want, the same, if not better, increases on all of these numbers, which will be dramatic improvements there. I think they chipped away at some of the things that were most important. Again, minimum salary isn't going to get the headline. But if you're a player that was making $570 and 5 years from now, that guy's going to be making $780, that's an incredible increase for players on the margins. And there's a ton of them. I mean, you're talking about like 15 guys on 15 to 25 guys on every 40-man roster are like pre-arbitration typically. And so there's quite a lot of money there to go around. I see some good questions in the chat, by the way. Celadette asking any Freddie Freeman news. Not that I have seen, and based on the fact that our chat is not completely exploding.
Not yet. I have notifications on,
Perfect.
So we'll see it.
We'll see it. We've got a question about Trevor Bauer. We're going to get to that. This is an interesting one. HG asks this. Do you guys think MLB is rushing the start of spring training and the season, especially with this many unsigned free agents? Lots of time and pressure. So again, players' mandatory reporting date is this Sunday, March 13th. There is the caveat if you have visa issues, etc., that there's some leeway. But everybody else is going to be there. I think most guys are excited to be there. I don't think that's going to be an issue. Your guess, Matt, when we were chatting before, is we think March 18th is tentatively the start of spring training. So for that, we're talking about 8 days from now, so a week from Friday. Does that feel rushed to you? Obviously, we've got some guys that are training. We got some guys down in Arizona. You've seen some of those clips. Does it feel rushed? Because then we've got opening day on April 7th with the asterisk of the Dodgers have a travel day on April 7th, so they will start playing on April 8th. But does this feel rushed? I think it's a fair question from HG.
Yeah, I think at least the start of spring training a little bit. And so maybe the first weekend of games, which would be more, 8 days from now, 7 days from now, you might get a lot more of minor league players who have been going through spring training already. Those guys are the ones who are primarily playing and getting the bulk of at-bats, which you do see relatively early on anyway with spring training games. I just think teams might be a little bit more conservative. And it would make sense, right? Like it's easier to kind of, you don't want to rush the process early and then you compromise a pitcher especially.
Yeah.
And then you get closer to the regular season and they're not, they haven't been built up maybe in the best way. What will be interesting is how free agency sort of overlaps with all of this, because yes, there's a report date for this Sunday, but if Clayton Kershaw hasn't signed, although I think he will be by then, and we'll get into that, players don't necessarily know where to go. Now, I know Freddie Freeman is obviously a popular name with the Dodgers. He's been posting on social media. He's from Southern California. He's been in the OC area this offseason. So, in my opinion, if he should just sign with the Dodgers, and you just have to go to Arizona rather than having to fly back across the country for spring training in Florida with the Braves.
Yeah.
Or the Yankees, who have been obviously another team that he's been.
Yeah, come on, Freddie. Think about how much easier your next 3 days would be if you just signed with the Dot. You could drive, get the whole family in the old minivan. Let's just cruise down to Arizona and get to some spring training. So, yeah, I'm with you. I mean, and look, you make a great point, which is the Dodgers minor league camp was opened. Now, don't even begin to get me started on how it makes sense that they're allowed to be there, but whatever. They were there. Fabian Ardaya of The Athletic has had some great stuff. If you're not following that, an awesome article on Bobby Miller touching 101 if you want to get fired up. Diego Cartaya, who's like a teenager that people are absolutely losing their minds. Michael Busch had a home run. There's some good stuff there. So if anything, maybe it's just fun because you get a week of Bobby Miller and Landon Knack, Ryan Pepio playing against other guys, and you're getting to watch those types of things. We're definitely going to appreciate spring training in much the same way we did during the COVID year. Back in 2020, I think, or excuse me, 2021, when it's just like you're just hungry for anything to take place. And so we'll see how that plays out. But I'm with you. that said, that only gives your main guys, 2-3 weeks of spring training. The sense I've gotten is that they're fine with that. I think most guys think spring training's kind of a little long, that they don't need as much time as maybe it seems like. Pitcher's probably the exception, but from a hitter's perspective, I'm guessing it's like those guys could give me a week of batting practice and we'll call it good.
Yeah, Justin Turner, that's something that Justin Turner and Cody Bellinger, when we were at the Justin Turner Golf Classic, his tournament last month, they were asked, obviously, the lockout wasn't going great at that time. The progress was basically non-existent. And Turner and Bellinger both said, look, if spring training is shortened to like 3 weeks or a month, we'll be fine. Yeah. With the caveat, like you just touched on, pitchers do need more time. So, they're going to get just about a month's worth of buildup. You can kind of play with it a little bit. Maybe your number 2 starter isn't necessarily starting the second game of the regular season now because he needs, another bullpen day before he can make his start. But yeah, I mean, I think it's better. The start of spring training is being rushed, but ultimately it will be just about 4 weeks, which I think is important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's get into the fun stuff, the hypothetical stuff, and we'll cross our fingers that in the next 15 minutes we get some breaking news here. Let's talk free agency. There's 200 free agents that are still out there. We got Freddie Freeman, Carlos Correa, Trevor Story, Chris Bryant, Castellanos, kind of the headliners on the offensive side. Carlos Rodon, probably one of the best pitchers that is still available out there. Obviously, Clayton Kershaw, a free agent. Kenley Jansen, a free agent. Joe Kelly, a free agent. So we got a mix of high-end guys from other teams and whatnot. The biggest name out there, if you're the Dodgers, has to be Freddie Freeman. Sort of a controversial one in a weird way. I mean, it's probably just a vocal minority that describe him. We've got people in the chat describing him as an aging first baseman. Somebody on our last video, we talked about Max Muncie saying, hey, I'm happy. I actually prefer playing second base. Let's get him in. I tweeted out my free agency sort of list of priorities where my first call would be. And I was the guy who said Clayton Kershaw re-signing was my number 1 priority this year. But I'm going to amend that when it comes to what's going on now, because the first phone call I make is to Freddie Freeman. I say, Freddie, you're a California guy. The Braves don't love you. They clearly don't love you. We win titles. You won a title last year, but we're going to compete every year. Look at this roster. You're friends with Justin Turner to some degree, I'm sure. You're friends with Cody Bellinger. You see these guys. We have a 6-year, $180 million offer on the table. We've got an extra, $15-16 million before we hit the competitive balance threshold. That's yours. We're giving you Corey Seager's money. Come on to town. 6 years, 180. That's what I would offer him. I imagine that's as good, if not the best offer out there. What say you?
Yeah, I would do the same. And, I know there's some concerns over a long-term contract with a player of his age, but like we've talked, Freddie Freeman is a professional hitter type thing. I think his approach fits well with the Dodgers philosophy. He's already playing first base. The universal DH is here. He's a left-handed bat. It makes sense. He's a steady guy. You know what you're going to get from him. And like you've touched on in some of our other videos, he's healthy.
Yeah.
So, maybe by the 5th or 6th year, that contract isn't what it was, but that's something that you sort of bite the bullet for, hoping within the first 4 years, you were competing, if not winning World Series.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I mean, I just think what he brings, and again, I'm going to repeat many of the things that you just said, but the side of the plate that he hits from, again, Max Muncie, surprised to me, says, I prefer to play second base over first base. I thought he was really, really good. But we'll see. I mean, so the biggest question we're getting in here, somebody says, THP says, I doubt Andrew Friedman goes past 5 years for Freddie Freeman. Obviously, it's interesting because you look at the competitive balance threshold. It's at 230. It's going to go up to $15 million over the course of these 5 years. So if you give him a 5-year deal, you know exactly what the competitive balance threshold will be in year 5. Do you think he goes to a 6th year? And I mean, again, you could project out that maybe that number is at 250 in year 6, but would you go 6 years for a guy Freddie Freeman's age? I mean, we've looked at the numbers before. The consistency, obviously playing first base helps from a health perspective, but he is 32 and a half years old. He'll turn 33 in September of this year. Do you have any concerns with going 6? Because knowing the reality is you're the Dodgers and not the Braves. If everybody's offering him 5, he's going to default to the Braves. You've got to either up him in money or in years. What would you do?
I guess if I had my choice, I would do just more money for 5 years.
Okay.
Just to avoid the
potential 160 over 5 years or 180 over 6.
I would probably do the 160 over 5.
Okay.
But I don't believe that that's what I think Freddie Freeman will look for, the extra year and dollar. So I think it will end up taking 6 years. And yeah, I do agree with you. If all things are equal, if the Braves decide, okay, we will go to a 6 year, then I think he's going back to Atlanta. But if they remain firm and say we're absolutely not going past 5 years, and the Dodgers or the Yankees do add on that extra year, I think he'll end up signing with one of those teams. And like I said earlier, there's going to be some concern and obviously some drop off. It happens with every player kind of getting to that advanced age. But I think Freddie Freeman taking half a step or a full step back from what he's at is still really good.
Yeah.
And like I said, if the early years of that contract, the Dodgers are competing for a World Series, maybe winning a World Series, then it already would have made sense.
Yeah, you've got the universal DH in there as well. So sort of a way to gracefully age. I mean, look at basically what's fascinating is Freddie Freeman in year 5 is Justin Turner right now. So, like, do you think Freddie Freeman is going to age worse than Justin Turner? Like, no. I mean, like, I don't see any reason why he's starting from a higher place. He plays a far easier position on your body, which is first base, and he's going to get more rest over the next 5 to 6 years because of the universal DH. But I look at Freddie Freeman. He missed 3 games last year. And when I say missed, likely rest, he missed 0 games in 2020. He missed 4 games in 2019, and he missed 0 games in 2018. He has missed 7 games in the past 4 seasons. That was age 28, 29, 30, and 31. This past season, he hit 300. He had an OPS of 900. He had 31 home runs. I mean, like, and he hits lefty, and he's a great dude, and we've seen him come up clutch in big moments because he absolutely murdered the Dodgers in 2020, it felt like. So, and he plays like one of the very few positions of quote-unquote need. Like first base and second base are kind of the only obvious positions where you can go and make an upgrade without bumping somebody off. So, I mean, California guy, you went for Seager. It didn't work out. I've said all along, I'd rather pay Freddie Freeman than I would Corey Seager, the deal that he got. But that's where I'm at. So to me, option number 1, Freddie Freeman. You say your first phone call is to Freddie Freeman as well. Is that accurate?
Yes, I agree with you.
Option number 2, I know we're going to agree on this one as well. Phone call number 2 is our guy Clayton Kershaw. Priority number 1 for me before I realized Freddie Freeman was legitimately an option and the Braves were going to screw that one up, at least potentially. The next one's Clayton Kershaw. Now this one's interesting, and you and I talked right before we went on the air. You actually predicted that Clayton Kershaw signing somewhere was going to be the first order of business of spring training. Why don't you walk the folks through why you think that and where you think the Dodgers sit in that?
Yeah, so a few reasons. One, I think everybody knows Clayton Kershaw is very much a creature of habit. He has his routine. He has his schedule that he likes to get on and stick to. And so with, the spring training report date now set, with what appears to be at least a tentative start date for spring training games set, I think he's going to want to get to camp and kind of start his process with a team, with trainers of, preparing for the season. Yeah. And I think with Kershaw, it's basically going to boil down to, either the Dodgers or the Rangers. I touched on in one of our other videos. I don't think he's retiring. I know that that's sort of been out there. He was on the Dan Patrick Show talking about preparing for the season, even though there was sort of still an open-ended date because of the lockout at the time. So for him, and it's not necessarily a money. Yeah. I don't think if the Dodgers come back and say, well, we'll pay you $5 million more, $10 million more than what the Rangers, I don't think that's going to do anything for him. Yeah. And I'm going to sound like a broken record. He cares about winning, and that, I think, will lead him back to the Dodgers. I'm sure there had already been some sort of negotiations before the lockout of, hey, if we offer you a contract, this is probably what it would be in the neighborhood of. Yeah. And so he has some idea of kind of what to expect, and I think those negotiations then are a little bit more advanced than maybe they would be with a Freddie Freeman or somebody else. And so for those reasons, I think he'll end up signing before Freeman, as much as Freeman, I think, will still himself sign pretty quickly.
Yeah, Laura said Kershaw probably already knows where he's going, and I think both of us agree. I mean, this was when you said it, I was like, yeah, I could see why that makes sense. There hasn't been any talk. There's been Freddie Freeman could sign quickly. Kershaw, that hasn't come out, but I'm with you. This isn't about money. I bet he had 2 offers on the table, one from the Rangers, one from the Dodgers when the lockout happened. He said, let me just rest. Let me get my arm figured out where I'm at from a health perspective, figure out if I want to make this go. You point out the Dan Patrick interview. Sounds like he wants to come back. It's not like he's going to be negotiating these 2 teams against each other. I think he probably says, here's the number. Let's make this happen. And then it just comes down to, do you want to pitch for the hometown Rangers on a team that's projected to lose, 20 more games than it wins? Or do you want to come back to a team in the Dodgers that's going to be set up for success again, they have the best roster in baseball right now. And we're talking about maybe signing Freddie Freeman and maybe signing Clayton Kershaw and maybe signing fill in the blank. So to me, that's where it's at. I threw out numbers. I don't know what you think. I was like, maybe they get him on like a 2-year, $40 million contract, give him a $20 million base salary, and then some pretty crazy incentives. Like, hey, you make 25 starts, that goes up $5 or $6 million. You make 20 starts, so on, that kind of thing. He was really good. People forget this. He was really good when he was healthy last year. Now, health is a major issue. The forearm injury is pretty much the worst thing you ever want to hear from a pitcher. So, do you remember what are the updates? Where are we at with Kershaw's health?
So what he said when the NLDS started, he spoke with reporters, and I was there covering the game, and he treated the flexor tendon injury with a PRP injection, and he said between that and rest with the offseason, it will be enough. That doctors he consulted with ruled out surgery. His UCL remained intact. There weren't any issues there. So those are all encouraging developments. I think it's worth recognizing. Look, it's plausible in my opinion that the flexor tendon injury started as a result of maybe it was just sunscreen, maybe it was some other mixture.
Yeah.
It's possible that he was using some sort of tack on a baseball, like 99% of pitchers in the game were until MLB cracked down. So did he stopped using, potentially again, maybe he stopped using whatever it may have been. That could have caused the injury. There were Tyler Glasnow, came out and said his UCL was torn because MLB made everybody go cold turkey right away. So I think that's possible.
Yeah.
I think also, which Kershaw admitted to, he rushed himself back from the injury the first time. So the offseason was really going to give him the first opportunity to really rest and let it heal the way it should.
Yeah.
The back trouble, I think he's gotten under control. He had to, it seemed like he needed to figure out some sort of training program that worked best. So in terms of health, yes, there have been issues, but I think there are reasons for them that you can kind of address and correct and not have to necessarily worry about moving forward.
Yeah. And you're leaning Dodgers.
I am. I think he has said repeatedly he values winning. He values being in the postseason. He would rather get to the postseason and lose than not get to the postseason at all. And that's just not the Rangers. And I think, he's not looking necessarily at 4, 5, 6 more years, I don't think, of playing.
Yeah.
If it's more 2 or 3 years, yes, his children are getting a little bit older, and that can become a little more challenging in terms of schooling and all that. But if you've done it this far, his family, I think, does love Los Angeles. They've heavily involved in the community here. They've obviously made inroads. So, another 2 years, maybe 3 at the max if he decides to tack one on at the end, I think they can get by.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about the other elephant in the room here as we're talking about Kershaw. So currently, the Dodgers' depth chart at pitcher looks like this. Walker Buehler 1, Julio Urias 2. You could argue who belongs in the 1 spot and who belongs in the 2 spot. But hey, conversation for another day. Tony Gonsolin, Andrew Heaney. Number 5 currently, Trevor Bauer. So this is a fascinating one. Obviously, Trevor Bauer is not formally charged. That was the news that has come out in the past couple of months. He finished last season on the commissioner's list. Whatever. So now he's back on social media. He's back posting videos, commenting on things. I believe Bill Plaschke advocated for him getting cut, and he posted #fire Bill Plaschke, which, look, there's plenty of Dodger fans that Trevor Bauer's side might not hate that tweet other than who it comes from. But where are you at Bauer? Because somebody tweeted at me and said, hey, you know what? The odds of him playing have gone way up. And I said, I agree with you. I still am highly, highly, highly skeptical he pitches for the Dodgers again. But you look at the competitive balance threshold where the Dodgers are. They're paying this guy a ton of money. So option 1 is you play him. It's possible he gets suspended, but I actually think the most likely scenario is his suspension ends up being time served already.
Yeah.
Because there do not need to be charges for Major League Baseball to suspend him. But the way it has trended, it feels like I would be surprised if they came down with a massive, massive suspension, but it's possible. So option 1 is he plays. You pay him, he plays. Option 2 is you pay him, and he doesn't play. You cut him, you send him home, whatever that looks like. And option 3 is you try and find a team that even if you can get somebody to eat $10 million of his salary and ask for nothing back, just to get as much of that off of your books as possible. Where do you stand on how you think this plays out with Trevor Bauer?
I agree with you that, any suspension that may come down is going to be already, basically retroactive. And I don't think it would exceed, the 81 games or whatever
Yeah.
he actually ended up serving last year, being out last year. So it'll be a wash. Like, he would have been credited for the time served, and that's it. That being said, I think it grew more likely that the Dodgers would bring him back than when, this
Yeah.
situation first started. But I still don't see them committing to something like that. I think there would be enough fan backlash and, frankly, enough pushback within the clubhouse as well that it just doesn't make sense. So, if you're the Dodgers, you have to try to find a way to trade him. And, maybe you don't end up eating 100% of his salary in that case. Maybe it's 80%, 75%, whatever it ends up being. But if not, if it comes to it, then, you'll just have to sort of bite the bullet and pay him and release him. They've gone through phases in the past where they've had dead money on their books, and they've still remained competitive and made it work. This is a pretty significant amount. At least it's not, a 5 or 6 year deal. So that is, I guess, that could end up being the one silver lining to, Bauer being kind of who he is and wanting to have signed a short-term contract.
Yeah, and I guess it is worth noting that there is a player option for year 3. That's a pretty low number that most people assumed he would not opt into when he signed it. So that could be a downside to releasing him, is I'm guessing you would have to pay him both of those years and get nothing out of it. Whereas if he does play out this year, odds are that he would probably opt out of that third year, depending on what his reputation stands. So that would be the advantage to trading him to any team, is just getting not only this year off of your books, but the risk of that third year, even if it's, I don't even remember the numbers. I want to say it was like 40 million, 40 million, 20 million or something like that, roughly was how it broke down. And so it'll be interesting. But yeah, I think I'm with you. I just, and I think the Dodgers got a lot of flack, probably way more than they expected when they signed him. And then for all this to happen, it was kind of like you stuck your neck out for a guy. And look, we're not going to legislate what happened and didn't happen. Clearly something happened. Whether it's legal or not legal, I mean, it's still bizarre. We'll use that word. How about that? Seems like a pretty tame word. And so it's tough to stick your neck out because you're already taking the risk. Like, you've lost all benefit of the doubt. So he got no benefit of the doubt when this all played out, because he had not, if this had happened to a guy that had a positive reputation, that's different than Bauer, who came with a lot of question marks. If you're the Dodgers, I'm with you. I think it's really risky to let him play this out from a PR perspective. And I'm not saying you should cater to the fans and PR is that, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is such a unique situation with Bauer and with the topic of thing that we're talking about, which is sexual abuse, whether he was convicted or not convicted, or charged or not charged. And so I'm with you. I still think 80% chance he does not play for the Dodgers again. But that 20% is a lot higher than it was 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, when it probably would have been closer to 5%. The reason I bring that up is because that is a massive domino to fall in how the Dodgers play this. Because if Bauer is back, you've got Buehler, Urias, Haney, and Bauer, and we're talking about signing Kershaw. You've got 5 starting pitchers. You're not going out hunting for another one, because then you've got Gonsolin behind. A lot of these prospects, Pepio, Miller, Knack, etc., that Mitch White, Andre Jackson, David Price, who I think is going to get cut, but all these guys who are there, I don't think you go big game hunting. And yet, if you sign Clayton Kershaw, in your estimation, if your rotation is Buehler, Urias, Haney, Kershaw, and Tony Gonsolin 5th, do you still need to go out and get another starting pitcher in your estimation?
Definitely. I don't think if you're the Dodgers, you can, I mean, I guess maybe you're going to, just because of how condensed everything is, you might start the season with Haney and Gonsolin in the starting rotation, but long term, I think it needs to be one of those two.
Okay.
And I just don't. If you're relying on both of them, I think that's a pretty big risk with what we've seen. Gonsolin also is coming off, an injury plagued season last year. Yeah. Haney has been a little inconsistent, and so to have both of those guys, I think, would kind of undermine the overall strength of the team. So if you're, Buehler and Urias obviously speak for themselves. Kershaw would be a very good number 3 starter. Either Haney or Gonsolin, ends up being 4th or 5th, depending on how free agency were to shake out, or trades, obviously. Yeah. That's one thing with Andrew Friedman. As much as, the Dodgers are interested in so-and-so, he tends to zig when people are expecting a zag, and so who knows what he may have kind of in the works.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm people that watch the show know I'm a Tony Gonsolin guy. I think you can explain away a lot of what happened last year with injuries and stuff. He was injured in spring training, came back, wasn't good, got injured again, came back, wasn't good. So I believe in Gonsolin. It's interesting when you started talking about Andrew Heaney, I realized that's a guy who was really hurt by the lockout. The Dodgers signed him. They clearly are trying to make tweaks to what he's doing, and they've had no access. And now they're going to get a 4-week spring training to work with him. So now, was there some back channel, him talking to a trainer who wasn't working for the Dodgers, who talked to a trainer who works for the Dodgers? I'm sure there was some of that. Maybe he happened to visit Driveline Baseball during the lockout. Who knows? But that's a guy that hurt. So I'll say for me, and again, if Clayton Kershaw is your guy, neither of us is penciling Kershaw in for 32 starts next year. So if Kershaw is one of your 5, you can probably count on 5 to 10 of those starts not happening for one reason or another. And so then you're looking at Heaney and Gonsolin as your 3 and your 4. And then you've got Mitch White, Andre Jackson. I think you've got some depth for that 5th spot. And who knows? I mean, maybe there's some belief that between Mitch White and Andre Jackson that you get a competent number 5 starter out of some combination of those two guys. I don't think that's unrealistic. If you think Pepio's ready, halfway through the season, or Bobby Miller or Landon Knack is one of those guys, Michael Grove, if one of them is ready halfway through the season to contribute, I think it's possible. So I think if you sign Kershaw, it's not a must, because again, if you sign Freddie Freeman and then you sign Clayton Kershaw, you're going to be, that's $50 million onto, I believe they're at about 215 right now. So that would put you at 265. You want to stay under, 270, because under 270 is where you get, start losing draft picks, which we know is something that the Dodgers value deeply. And so for me, if you can sign Kershaw, as weird as it sounds, I think I would be fine with letting the beginning of the season play out and see what happens. There are 12 playoff teams, so there's a little less risk, but just let it play out. See where you're at when you get closer to the trade deadline. See what you've got from some of these guys, and then go from there. Because we know, as you said, trades are always an option. If they don't get Clayton Kershaw, the next guy I would call is Carlos Rodon. He's kind of the only other starting pitcher out there that I would feel good about. Obviously, he's had some injury history. People are projecting maybe a 1-2 year deal at the most. He's a guy that I know Justin Lorber's talked about. He's big on Carlos Rodon. Do you have an opinion on Rodon if Kershaw doesn't pan out and we're not projecting a trade here? Is Rodon a guy you're interested in, or if you can't get Kershaw, are you all in on a trade?
No, I think he's someone I'd be interested in. He's definitely a quality plan B, especially if it would be a short-term contract, which, Andrew Friedman has shown a willingness to do, definitely for the mega stars in the past. I think it's clear that the Dodgers sort of prefer to get guys in maybe on more money, less years. I wouldn't necessarily extend myself for him if there was a bidding war. I don't know if that would necessarily make too much sense for the Dodgers. But yeah, as a plan B at a reasonable, I don't want to say rate, but contract, I think that would be sufficient.
Yeah, and again, I always joke. I think the Dodgers prefer quality over quantity. This is the old Rich Hill rule. They would rather get a really quality pitcher who can give them 20 starts a year than an average pitcher who can get them 32. Now, you might be saying, isn't Andrew Heaney the average guy who gets you 32 starts a year? You might be right on that. But I think in general, they want to have 3 or 4 guys that they can feel pretty good about. And I think Rodon fits that. If Kershaw decides to go elsewhere, if the Bauer situation does not work out where he's pitching for the Dodgers, I don't mean work out in a positive way. If he does not end up pitching for the Dodgers, then that's something. The last guy on my list is Joe Kelly. I like Joe Kelly. We've talked about this. They declined his option. That was for competitive balance threshold reasons, most people presume. We did a video last week or a couple weeks ago saying he wants to come back. He has said the Dodgers have interest in bringing him back. I think in a deal that's somewhere in the $6 to $7 million range, maybe 2 to 3 year-ish. Now, the Dodgers have a pretty stacked bullpen already. I would say it's a very good bullpen. I think if you bring Joe Kelly back, you remain having one of the best, but this would be in place of Kenley Jansen. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth with this, and I can see, I think an argument can be made for either one of them. If I had to choose which one is most likely to return, I think it needs to be Joe Kelly, just because there has been so much transparency about how both parties feel about each other.
Yeah.
Andrew Friedman has said, yes, we declined our team option, but we're very much going to be in the mix with him. Then Joe Kelly in a recent interview said, yes, I want to be back. And in that same interview, when answering questions about the Dodgers, he constantly referred to them as we. And so to me, he hasn't really gone anywhere. And I think this is, a signing that will, because it's so expected, I'm sure the conversations have been easy. relatively natural that might not happen maybe until the middle of the week.
Yeah.
Kind of after the Dodgers have sort of figured out, where Freddie Freeman may have landed, where Clayton Kershaw may have landed, then they can circle back to Joe Kelly and finish dotting the I's and crossing the T's. With Kenley, Andrew Friedman kind of just said, again, this is referring to comments he made late last year before the lockout, just that Kenley, reached kind of the standard answer he's given a lot with free agents is they've earned the right to kind of canvas the market and see what's out there. And so I feel if Kenley were open to a extremely team-friendly deal, and the Dodgers will be happy to make something happen.
Yeah.
But if not, I think they'll let him walk.
Yeah, I've been big on relief pitchers are unique in that until you see them in your environment in the role that you're going to ask them to, it always feels like a mystery bag of like, what are we actually going to get out of this guy? I think now that Joe Kelly has settled in, he clearly brings an attitude that the Dodgers, I think, need. Just a little personality, a little feistiness that I think guys feed off of. Vesia gives you a little bit of that. Gratterall obviously gives you a lot of that, which I think is good. He throws hard, obviously. And I just think his ability and carelessness when it comes to throw me whenever. Like, that was always my beef with Jansen was this, like, and I don't blame him for it, but it was sort of like, I'm only pitching the ninth, like, or the eighth and the ninth, but I'm closing games. Don't bring me in the seventh. Don't bring me in to shut something else. Whereas Trine and Kelly, both these guys are like, whatever you need, coach. Like, you want me in the sixth? Fine. You want me to put out a fire in the third? Fine. You want me to close a game in the ninth? Fine. They don't care, and I think that's important, and I think it gives the Dodgers flexibility in the bullpen. They have some other guys. Daniel Hudson's a late end. They're paying him to be an end-of-game guy. Gratterall, he's got a breaking ball now. You're hoping he develops into that, right? Vesia from the left side gives you a left-handed option out there. We haven't even mentioned Caleb Ferguson, who was one of the best relief pitchers in baseball a year and a half ago before he got hurt. Tommy Kahnle, Evan Phillips. They've got plenty of guys out there. So that's why this is low on the priority list for me, because if the Dodgers trotted out the bullpen they have now, they'd be fine. You've got guys like Evan Phillips who can't be optioned. So if you sign Joe Kelly, it's a pretty decent chance that Evan Phillips is not with the Dodgers. I liked what I saw from him. You're limited on 40-man roster spots, all these types of things. But all things considered, if it's not costing me a draft pick and it's not my money to spend, I would love to see Joe Kelly back next year. The last piece for me on this one is sort of the bench spot. And this is where the Dodgers will be getting Edwin Rios back. That's a big plus. He was not very good last year, but again, you could write that off to the shoulder injury that he ended up missing all of last season. They've got Matt Beatty still on the roster who, look, for all his warts, I mean, I think you learned to appreciate Matt Beatty last year after watching Billy McKinney and Luke Raley and some of these guys come up and be terrible. DJ Peters. They do still have Luke Raley. I believe he's the guy that's left. One of those guys is left. I'm pretty sure it's Luke Raley. He's still on the 40-man roster. So they've got Zach McKinstry. Obviously, Gavin Lux, if you go out and sign a Freddie Freeman, Gavin Lux ends up on the bench. Chris Taylor would be somewhere in the mix there, probably DH. You can pencil him into the DH just because that's easier. He'll be taking either the DH or whoever's DHing that day spot in the field. Yeah. So you've got Lux, you've got McKinstry, you've got Beatty, you've got Rios. Do you think there's a need for them to go out and add a guy? The only other guy I can mention is Michael Busch, who is learning to play second base. Everybody says, hey, the offense is not the question. It's where he plays on defense, so he could be an option. But do you prioritize after the disaster last year of going out and adding maybe one or two even, sort of $3 to $6 million bench bats?
Definitely, and I think it needs to come from the right-handed side because the majority of the guys you just mentioned all hit left-handed, and I don't know how this happens, but it seems like every single year the Dodgers, like the trade deadline comes up, and the rumors are, the Dodgers are looking for a right-handed bench bat again. As much as I think, we've touched on some of the concerns with Gavin Lux. I think he's obviously, there's potential for him to one way or another end up being the odd man out, and in terms of a starting role.
Yeah.
And he is somebody who has openly said that his swing is predicated on timing and rhythm, and that comes with playing on a regular basis. So there's some concern there. I believe that he's capable of contributing. I just don't know if he'll be able to reach that with kind of the role that the Dodgers might have to put him in.
Yeah.
Zach McKinstry, I think he still needs to be considered a little bit of a question mark. The potential is there, but again, still inexperienced. They wanted him to kind of fill the Kike Hernandez role, but he just wasn't necessarily ready for that. And I don't blame him. I mean, he hadn't been up in the majors really, and then they thrust him into this super utility role.
And he performed pretty well, honestly, till he got hurt.
Right. So I just, would that have sustained maybe over a full season? We don't necessarily know yet. So it's a little too unknown for me across the bench. And I think they would benefit from having, a David Freese type right-handed bat, just a professional hitter who knows I'm a pinch hitter. I'm going to come in, at more or less any point of the game, and I need to sort of deliver.
Matt, I owe an apology to the people. Austin Barnes was not mentioned as a potential bench
bat.
Right. And you
well,
omitted him as a right-handed bench bat as well, Matt. How could you forget?
If Barnesy can get back to hitting the way he once did when he took Rendell's starting spot.
Once did. Do we need to look up Austin Barnes' fan graph? We're not going to turn this into an Austin Barnes.
He went on that nice run in 2017.
What do you think his batting average was in 2017? I'm looking it up right now.
Well, I mean, regular season, probably 270.
You know what? All right, I'm going to give this one to you. I remember him having the on-base percentage of about 400. He played in 102 games, 262 at-bats, which was a career high. He hit 290 with a over 400 on-base percentage and a 486. He had a 892 OPS. Austin Barnes did in 102 games. Unfortunately, he hit 205, 203, 244, and 215. Last year, his on-base percentage was sub 300. So it's been quite a bit. So I mean, anyways, we know Austin Barnes is the backup catcher. There's nothing there. He is what he is, and he plays an important role in the team, and he will probably, I imagine, be around for a little. I think this is his last year of arbitration. I could be wrong about that.
I believe so.
But who knows? Maybe he sticks around if he doesn't feel like he can get a starting job somewhere else. But the guy that I've mentioned as a guy that I'll just throw out there is Tommy Pham. Tommy Pham is a right-handed hitter, as you mentioned. I like that there's some versatility. He can play a little bit of the infield. He can play either the corner outfield spots. If you know me, you know I'm a big StatCast guy. His StatCast numbers are pretty solid. He's not one of the top 50 free agents out there. He's kind of in the 75-ish range. And so could you get a guy like Tommy Pham on a 1-year deal for $5 or $6 million, 2-year deal for $10, $12 million? I think so. I think he provides you depth. He's probably at a point in his career where maybe he wants to be on a team like the Dodgers. He's willing to accept a non-everyday role. But I just think right-handed, he checks a lot of the boxes of who's a right-handed hitter, positive StatCast numbers, encouraging stuff that maybe you could unlock something. But I'm with you. I mean, they've got to do something because we can't relive what happened last year. Pujols, are you interested in a Pujols reunion, Matt?
It wouldn't necessarily be my first choice. I think they need somebody who can also give them at least semi-regular playing time in the field. But if it ends up being Pujols, it could be worse.
Yeah. Somebody just tweeted this. Albert Pujols is 21 home runs away from 700. There are 15 new designated hitter spots. Who is biting here? I mean, look, Pujols was fine last year. And, we saw what the alternative was to Pujols. Obviously, with the designated hitter, his splits are what they are. He does well half the time and terrible the other half of the time. So I wouldn't hate it if Pujols was back. It'd be kind of fun if he actually started sniffing 700 home runs. That would be a fun thing for it to happen. But there's your David Freese type. You wanted a professional hitter, a veteran, a guy who knows his role. You kind of checked all those boxes. Let's get to some questions here. This is a good one, a name that's been floating around. Ryan W. asks, Jock Peterson? You making a phone call to Jock Peterson, Matt? Designated hitter now available?
I mean, maybe. Look, I firmly believed in Jocktober. I thought it would have been worth re-signing him for the postseason alone. Whatever you get what you get in the regular season, it was going to be worth it come the playoffs. He obviously wanted a larger role. If he remains unsigned long enough, I make a phone call just to see. Because then at that point you can keep Luke Raley in the minors, maybe Edwin Rios.
Or Luke Raley might be looking for another team if Jock Peterson signs.
Or that. Or that. I think maybe Edwin Rios is playing with AAA for most of next year, at least to begin with. And so he would be in a tough spot too, because he's somebody who is still sort of developing, right? So as much as maybe he could provide you with some pop off the bench, is that the best way for him to kind of suit the organization at this time? Probably not.
Yeah.
So there's a left-handed spot that I guess Jock could take.
Yeah, I think, obviously, if you don't go out and let me ask you this question. If you don't go out and get Freddie Freeman, you've got Muncie at first base, you've got Lux at second base, you've got Trey at short, you've got Turner at third, obviously Will Smith behind the plate, you got Pollock, Bellinger, at Betts in the outfield. And again, I'll pencil Chris Taylor in as a designated hitter just because, guess what? He could play third base, he could play left field, he could play center field, he could play right field, he could play second base, he could play shortstop. So he's kind of, those are your everyday guys. So that moves Gavin Lux into an everyday role. You don't really have depth behind it. If you look at your 9-man group, you've got Rios, McKinstry, all these guys we've mentioned already, Beatty, who are they're fine. They're serviceable major league players. Most teams wouldn't bat an eye. If you're the Dodgers, you sort of have higher expectations. If you don't get Freeman, do you feel the need to go out and get another bat? Whether it's Peterson, whether it's Kyle Schwarber, whether it's Chris Bryant, whether it's Nicholas Castellanos. Do you feel like that's a major need for the Dodgers if Freeman doesn't come? Or is Freeman hey, we'll bite at that level, but anything else, we're fine. We'll stick with what we got?
No, I think they do need, I think for me, the order of position players impact, guys who could start pretty regularly. It's obviously Freddie Freeman's at the top.
Yeah.
If it's not him, then I think your next call needs to be to Chris Bryant to figure out where his market is at. And after him, I think who we have discussed in the past, but not tonight, Seiya Suzuki.
Yep.
He's still making the jump. The Dodgers were mentioned as one of the teams with having interest in him. That's a right-handed bat. It's not filling kind of the left-handed batter that, Freddie Freeman would for Corey Seager, but he still would be kind of an impact guy that you could rotate throughout the outfield and at DH.
Yeah.
I like Chris Bryant because of the versatility he brings.
Yeah.
That's something that the Dodgers would be able to rely on. And he plays positions that they would really, especially third base.
Yeah.
If then you can get Justin Turner into the DH, and then maybe Gavin Lux can play some second base instead of the outfield, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, it's really a question of, do you believe in A.J. Pollock sustaining the success that he had last year? Which I would say yes. I mean, I think he has a career of being a really good, you could even say borderline all-star player at multiple times throughout his career. Now, that was the first time that we kind of saw that peak A.J. Pollock as his time with the Dodgers, but he was really, really good in the regular season. I think the second question is Gavin Lux. What do you believe about Gavin Lux? I'm not talking about defense. I'm not talking about can he play center field, can he play second base. I'm talking about offensively. I loved what I saw from Gavin Lux down the stretch. Small sample size, last 3-4 weeks of the season. He was great. I thought in the postseason he competed. I know the performance wasn't there, but they were way different looking at bats. And so I think Gavin Lux, this is a guy we can't forget. He's 21 years old, I think, 22 maybe. He used to be a top 5, top 10 prospect in baseball. And so he's a guy who comes with a pedigree. And whether you believe there's something there, because if you don't believe there's something there, at what point does he get an everyday shot to take this? And you could say it was last year and he missed it, but I think he deserves another chance. And so that's why for me, if it's not Freddie Freeman, I'm a little bit hesitant because I'd love to see Lux get a little bit of a runway again and say, okay, you had some success. We're going to give you one more shot. If it doesn't work out, then we're trading, a distressed asset and we'll go solve our problems then another day. But that would be an interesting one for me. Do you believe in Pollock? Do you believe in Lux? If the answer to most of those questions are yes, then I think you roll the dice. Again, I really think the 12-team postseason, the downside to it is if you're a team like the Dodgers and says, do we need to upgrade Edwin, Rios, Matt Beatty, and Zach McKinstry as our bench? We're definitely making the playoffs with this group. Why do we need to go do that now? We can go adjust at the trade deadline once we have more information, but then we're not paying a huge full season salary. I really think that's going to shift the way some teams think. And if you're the Dodgers, say, hey, Gavin Lux playing for 3 months isn't going to kill us. If he ends up being great, it's a massive win. If not, fine. We're probably still first or second in the division at that point. We still have the best roster, and we go from there. So do you buy any of that with the 12-team playoffs? I know it's not a massive expansion, but
yeah, I think those are definitely fair points. And one thing, as much as I do believe the Dodgers should check in on Chris Bryant and Seiya Suzuki, I don't anticipate them overpaying for anybody, Freddie Freeman included. And so, yes, I think they will do their due diligence, but I do agree with you that they probably believe in A.J. Pollock and Gavin Lux. And I'm with you on Gavin Lux. I think he was given an everyday opportunity at a pretty young age without much major league experience under his belt yet. It could have just been he wasn't necessarily ready for that.
Yeah.
Now, can you completely fault him? I don't think so. And I think his willingness to A, adjust to playing the outfield, and B, I think he played the outfield better than he's given credit for.
He's currently listed on ESPN, by the way, as an outfielder and not an infielder. So that, for what it's worth. He's also 24, so I was wrong on his age. But go ahead, continue.
Yeah, so I think if you're the Dodgers, you have to check in on the big guys, just because what if for whatever reason Chris Bryant were to come on a short-term contract? You don't necessarily know.
Yeah.
But if not, then you can absolutely go into the season with your team pretty much as is. and be comfortable that once you get closer to the trade deadline, you're going to be still in a strong position and able to kind of address your needs at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just looking at the depth chart right now, obviously you got Outman, Luke Raley, a couple guys, and then infielders, Yorbeat Vivas, another guy that was protected who I wouldn't expect much. Jacob Amaya, another guy I wouldn't expect much from this year. Eddie Leonard, the third, I would not expect much. You got Beatty, you've got McKinstry, you've got Rios, Austin Barnes.
I think,
as well.
another thing with Gavin Lux on the possible trade front is the reports so far from spring training is Michael Busch has looked better and more comfortable at second base. So are they already grooming, I don't want to say a replacement, but a future plan that maybe Gavin Lux may not be part of?
Well, and Trey Turner's only got 1 year left on his contract, so maybe it's those two guys up the middle. But I mean, that's another one, right? If you believe in Michael Busch, and look, this is what the Dodgers did last year, if we're being honest. They looked at the end of their bench, and they looked at McKinstry, and they looked at Beatty, and they looked at Rios, and they looked at Raley and Rex and all the guys that they've got down there, past tense, and they basically said, we got 6 or 7 guys we feel decent about. We need 2 of them to pan out. Well, guess what? Rios got hurt. Beatty was disappointing, and all of the rest of those guys were terrible. So they basically played a numbers game and said, we'll take our chances. They could do the same thing this year and say, between Michael Busch and Gavin Lux, can we find a competent Major League second baseman in there? I think there's reasonable expectation that the answer to that question would be yes. Out of Beatty, McKinstry, Rios, can we find 2 competent Major League pinch hit level guys? Again, I think pretty reasonable to say, yeah, I think we can. Now, with injuries and that kind of thing, that's where you probably need some more depth because you got 5 40-man spots that I don't want to say wasted, but I wouldn't expect much out of this year. But we'll see. Let's get to some questions in here. I asked folks on here if we've got any questions, and we did get some. So let's pull through these. THP said, this is probably a question for Justin Lorber, but do you think Ryan Pepio, Miguel Vargas, and Michael Busch are up this year? Vargas is not a name that I've heard talked about this year. I think he's a guy that maybe is a little further away. Pepio, I believe Friedman has mentioned, is a guy who's in the rotation. Not in the rotation. In the realm of possibilities for this year, and I definitely think Michael Busch is a guy that we see up this year. Again, the reports on Pepio are high velocity. We know the changeup is what it is. I think there was an article from Ardaya again, or a note saying he's working on a cutter. He feels really, really good. So I think Pepio, I think Miller, I think Knack are all 3 guys that very, very likely you could see at some point this year. And then I would say Busch might be the first. He might be the earliest of any of those guys to make it up to the majors, depending on what they do with Freeman. Any other thoughts from you on that?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well.
Nomo Fomo asks, I'll go this one to you, Matt. What is the update on Max Muncie?
So Muncie has said he was going to be ready for opening day. Obviously, the extra, it only ended up being now a week extra, but it should end up helping him. He still will not need surgery, and what he explained to David Vassay on Dodger Talk was because of the way the ligaments in his elbow laid after they were torn, he didn't need surgery. I kind of chuckled in that because that was a first for me. I have never heard something like that. Admittedly, when it comes to UCL damage and Tommy John, 9 times out of 10, it's been with a pitcher who just needed the surgery eventually. So Muncie's optimistic that he's going to be fine. He won't need surgery. He did then sort of hedge it a little bit and add the caveat that he won't have like a full grasp or expectation or understanding, if you will, until he's taking live swings in games. And so once that kind of comes, then he'll know where he stands. But he anticipates being ready for opening day, which is obviously great news.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan W. asks, thoughts on some of the rule changes, bigger bases, pitch clock. Sorry if I already got in here a little late. So the update is that in 2022, there will be no new rule changes. 2023, Major League Baseball has the ability to implement rule changes after 45 days rather than waiting a year. There is a committee. There are like 6 players on it, but there's like 9 non-players. So the players do not have a majority. They'll not be able to dictate what they want there. But bigger bases, pitch clock. Matt and I actually did a video that I believe is up on the YouTube page. Is that right, Matt?
It is.
So on Monday, that's right. We posted Monday. We talked about some of the rule changes, our thoughts on that. Neither of us have a strong opinion about bigger bases. We have pretty different opinions when it comes to banning the shift and pitch clock. So that's worth a conversation, going to watch that conversation. Derek asks, Jeff, is this the year the Dodgers experiment playing Will Smith at another position? My guess is no. I don't think Austin Barnes is good enough to be taking up that time. There's not an obvious place, unless you count DH as another position. I'm guessing he'll get quite a bit of time at designated hitter as an opportunity to get Barnes in there. But Cartaya is a number of years away, probably at least 2 years away. If you had a guy like Keibert Ruiz still in the organization, I think yes, maybe. But I don't think you have a backup. I don't even think they have a third catcher on the 40-man roster right now. So I don't think there is a reason to start experimenting there. I think he is, I would argue, and have argued on this show, he's the best catcher in baseball. But I don't think they mess with third base or first base. Do you?
No, I don't think there's really any need to. He'll get his rest days when Austin Barnes is catching Clayton Kershaw starts.
Yeah. Gosh, don't do this to me, Matt. Why do you already have to make me mad about certain things?
No, it was supposed to be a positive thing because
Clayton
then that
Kershaw's
means
back.
Kershaw
That's
is back
fine.
with
That's
the team.
Fair. Let's see. A couple people are talking about some trades with the A's. I mean, it's hard to speculate trades because then we're trying to guess who's in it. But obviously, the A's are one of a couple teams that many people expect to be sellers. They've got a number of pitchers, maybe a Frankie Montas reunion, who knows? But that would be definitely a team to watch. Ethan asks, who is starting opening day? Well, if you're talking Major League opening day, nobody, because the Dodgers don't play till the next day. But got to be Walker Buehler, right?
Absolutely. I thought you were going to lean the other way.
I mean, I've argued that I think Urias. I'll frame my argument by saying I think Urias is as good as Walker Buehler. I don't think it is. We're talking about guys with a noticeable separation in talent ability. I think it looks different. I think Walker Buehler's is more aesthetically pleasing because he throws the ball hard, etc. But from a results perspective. So with that said, I think Walker Buehler is fairly clearly the quote unquote ace of this staff.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you. I guess I have to add the caveat. If Kershaw's back, I think they give him that opening day.
You think
start.
they give him on the road, or do you think they wait and he gets opening day at home?
No, I think they give him on the road. Last year, it would have made sense to save him for the home start because of the ring ceremony.
Right.
I think if he's back with the team, they still let him start opening day. And frankly, Buehler isn't going to care. He has said repeatedly that as long as Kershaw's on this staff, he's the ace. And it is a little bit of lip service at this point, but he's fine with it.
I can't imagine. I feel like, I don't know. I can't imagine. Buehler doesn't strike me as the guy who's like, you know what, I'm pissed. I didn't get to start opening day. He strikes me as a guy that like couldn't care less about starting. I mean, it'd be cool, but like he's not losing any sleep. Okay, we get some good questions here. Craig, do you think the Apple TV deal is a big one? So if you didn't hear about this, Major League Baseball is going to have 2 games on Apple TV every Friday. I believe there's some sort of daily recap show as well. Is it a big deal? Yes. I think so. Is it a good deal? I think no. It's a terrible deal. I have Apple TV. Shout out to Ted Lasso. But most people don't have it. If the Dodgers are playing on Apple TV on a Friday, that means you will not be able to watch it. It will be blacked out locally. It will not be on.
No, it won't. It won't be.
Oh, are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be. Those will be exclusive Apple TV broadcasts, and so not subject to local blackouts.
So it'll still be on Sportsnet.
It'll
LA?
only be on Apple.
Oh, that's what I mean. That's what I mean.
Apple
Like you have to. Sorry, you have to watch the game. Yeah, I should have clarified.
Yeah.
You have to watch the game on Apple TV. It will not also be on Sportsnet LA or something.
Correct.
So I think it's a bad deal. I mean, like just a bunch of people that aren't going to be able to watch games, and a bunch of people don't have Apple TV. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but it seems crappy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's so much talk about MLB needs to improve popularity and grow the sport, and I just don't think putting it on Apple TV is the right step towards doing that. All it is really is, and it's fine. Like, hey, owners, if you can get it. It's just another revenue stream.
Totally, it was a complete money grab with no care whatsoever for the health of the sport. Swell and Sausage says, do you think Trey Turner wants to be back? Seems like maybe not. I don't know where you'd get the idea he doesn't want to be back. Obviously, he's going into his last year. If we were not like talking about a free agency period that was 3 days, if this was like a 3-month free agency period, Trey Turner extension would have been maybe number 1 on my list. I think he's that good. I don't get any sense he doesn't want to be back. I would highly prioritize offering him a fat extension if it were me. I mean, you're more plugged into sort of reading the tea leaves. Have you heard anything indicating Trey Turner has reservations about LA?
Nothing at all. I mean, I think the only thing I'll say is that I don't know if he's fallen in love with LA yet. I'm not saying that he won't possibly do it. Early read for me is it strikes me as kind of wherever he can get the best contract for a team. I don't think he would join a non-contender.
Yeah.
So the best contract from a contender, I think, will be enough to get him done. And I think if the Dodgers offer him enough, then he'd be willing to sign before reaching free agency. But I think he's a Boris client, I believe. And we know how that can
go. Totally. Just a note here, Daniel Zamora, we mentioned Dodgers did make a minor league signing. Apparently, obviously, this wasn't subject to any deadline. They could have done this at any point. But Josh Thomas, who's a great sort of minor league follow if you're into the Dodgers, he said Zamora gets a ton of horizontal movement on his slider, 18.9 inches, which is the third most in all of baseball in 2021, who threw 50 or more. So there you go. You want to get fired up about Daniel Zamora? There you go. A few more questions. Dustin May, injury update. EK Ramling asking about that. Richard Taylor on Facebook as well. Not expected back till after the All-Star break at best, but I think decent chance we don't see him at all this year. Is that fair?
No, I think decent chance we don't see him as a starter. Okay. I think he'll come back and be a relief pitcher just because he wouldn't have time to build up to be a full starter. Unless, if it's looking like the Dodgers need starting pitching, then maybe they'll adjust. But I would anticipate Dustin May being kind of a postseason bullpen weapon.
Yeah. Okay. Andrew E. wants to know when free agency starts. It started 5 hours ago. There's just nothing going on. Nobody has signed anything.
No.
I loved Eno Saris basically saying everybody wants to compete. Nobody wants to be the first signing because the speculation is that there was tons of tampering going on behind the scenes, and if you announce the deal immediately, it'd be like, oh, interesting. You had a 6-year, $180 million with Freddie Freeman worked out two minutes after the deadline. So now everybody's so freaked out the other way that nobody's going to announce anything, which sucks. Okay, let's get to just a couple more questions. Alleluia 1 says, how many Dodgers in the All-Star game this year, Matt? I'll throw you in the spot there.
Oh, man. 4.
Okay, you want to throw names out there? Or?
No.
Okay. I'm going to go Trey Turner, Will Smith, Walker Buehler, Julio Rios, Blake Trinan.
I don't think he makes it.
And Mookie Betts. Give me 6.
6. It would make sense. It's going to be in LA. That's another thing too. With the lockout being resolved and the schedule starting when it is, we avoided the All-Star game potentially being moved out of Dodger Stadium for a second time, which would have been a complete disappointment.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody clarified this, and Google confirms that Jeff Barry is Trey Turner's agent, so not a Scott Boras client, apparently.
Okay. I don't know why I thought it was Boras. Well, then, hey, maybe the Dodgers can get something done then.
Yeah. What's funny is, and that'll be our last question, but people are saying, wow, 6. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, I didn't mention Muncie. I didn't mention Turner. I didn't mention Bellinger. I didn't mention Pollock. There's a bunch of other guys. Kershaw. Kershaw is the classic example. If he re-signs for the Dodgers and the All-Star game is in Los Angeles, come on. There might be quite the push for Clayton Kershaw to make an All-Star team if he's even in the realm of deserving. So
yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts? We're at the hour 15 mark, Matt. So we'll let folks go to bed and wake up in the morning and hope that some folks have signed. But any last thoughts here? We have a CBA. Baseball is going to happen. I did have one question. I don't know if you know the answer to this one off the top of your head. Dodgers' first home game. Do we have a date on that one?
I don't have that off the top of my head, just because their schedule, the way it is now, they're playing the Rockies, and then they have, I do have it for you. It is April 14th against the Reds.
There you go. That looks right.
Because then, so they start with 3 on the road against the Rockies, and then a 2-game series in Minnesota, and then they're back home. And April 15th, they starts the 14th, but then April 15th is the 75th anniversary of Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier. Dodgers, I imagine, will have a nice celebration for that at home.
Yeah, and people commenting that I missed Chris Taylor in my list, which I will say this.
There you go.
I was calling Chris Taylor to be an All-Star last year before anybody else. So, it's no disrespect to Chris Taylor over here. This is a Chris Taylor guy, all right?
Here, just make the entire All-Star team out of the Dodgers roster and call it a day.
I'm fine.
Let's just do that.
I'm fine. It's just funny when you go down the list because you're like, well, yeah, Will Smith, that's easy. Mookie Betts, that's easy. Walker Buehler, that's easy. Again, I think Blake Trinan being the closer, I think that's going to be a better than 50% chance Blake Trinan makes the All-Star game. And then you just start going around. It's I think Urias is as good as Buehler. Who knows? He won 20 games last year. He finished 4th or 5th in Cy Young voting. So you just go down the list, and all these guys, Cody Bellinger could get in on reputation alone if he's back to sort of normal. Max Muncy might have 25 home runs at the All-Star break, like Chris Taylor, as folks have pointed out, was really good.
And Freddie Freeman.
Yeah, Freddie Freeman as a Dodger. That's true. We can't forget about him. Gavin Lux breakout campaign. Trey Turner. Trey Turner was he finished, I think by one metric, he had the highest wins above replacement of any player in the National League last year. So, there's guys everywhere. Anyways, all right, folks, thank you so much for joining us. Laura, HG, Andrew, CK, Swell and Sausage, Derek, Suzanne, folks, we see you in there. Thank you for joining us. That's Matt Moreno. My name is Jeff Spiegel. Great news. The lockout is over. Opening day is set. Unfortunately, we got no breaking news while we recorded this, but I have a feeling that Matt and I might be back on here tomorrow or at some point tomorrow morning or at some point tomorrow, talking about Kershaw, talking about Freddie Freeman, talking about some moves that get made. So, as always, as Matt said, thank you for staying with us throughout the lockout. We understand that it's challenging, it's discouraging, but thank you for checking, watching videos, reading DodgerBlue.com. If you haven't already, if you're new to us, follow us, DodgerBlue1958, everywhere on social media, DodgerBlue.com, and of course, please ring the notification bell, click subscribe. We do have some exciting news coming up, so stay tuned to that in the next couple of weeks. We'll roll that out before opening day, but we appreciate you, and see you next time.